Welcome back, everyone. So I made this video about 2 months ago, and it ended up getting a lot of action. Like, we're talking millions of views on YouTube and Instagram. Because of that, I ended up getting a lot of questions about different things that I did in the video and about specific things that I used, like the jigs. So I thought I'd make a longer video to try to explain and answer some of those questions, because it's kind of hard to fit any amount of useful information in just a 30-second video. So first of all, let's talk about the wood. I like to use scrap wood, and this was just a plain old 2x4 that I found on the beach, actually. I live on the west coast here in Canada, and surprisingly, a lot of wood seems to float up on the beach. Now, you can use whatever wood you want, of course, but as a savvy DIYer, I like to save money when I can. So the first thing that I do is I actually set my saw to 54 degrees, and that brings me to my first most common question, which is, what if your saw doesn't go to 54 degrees? And there are a couple of options for you. One is you can make a steep angle jig. I don't have a video on that, but if you search for steep angle jig, you'll probably find a pretty good video on YouTube about that. And that'll make it so you can cut a lot steeper angles on a saw that doesn't normally allow for that. Now keep in mind though, when watching those steep angle jig videos, your goal is to cut an angle at 36 degrees. Now I know you're probably wondering why 36 when I'm setting my saw at 54, but this is where things get a little bit weird when trying to explain angles on a miter saw, because when I'm setting my miter saw to 54 degrees, I'm actually cutting a 36 degree angle. So the goal is to get that point at 36 degrees. I hope that's not too confusing. I just thought I'd give you those numbers to help you out a little bit. So the other question was, can you just start by cutting a 45 degree angle and making that diamond shape with 45 degree angles instead of 54 degree angles? And the answer is yes, you can. I'm just going to start by explaining the process for this 54 degree angle star, and then I'll explain the 45 degree angle star, because it is pretty convenient actually to just be able to cut 45 degree angles on your miter saw and not have to make a steep angle jig. Now, after making that first cut, I slide this over and I've got my stop block set there. And of course, the main question was, how long am I cutting these pieces? Now, in this video for this star, I was actually cutting them 5.5 inches long. So every 5.5 inches, I was making that 54 degree angle cut. But the measurements differ based on the width of the stock. So I'll show you how to measure that up. So basically, for this piece of wood here, it's only about 3.25 inches wide. And what I'm doing here is I'm measuring the length of the angle that I cut. In this case, it's 5 3/8. And then I'm marking that on this edge over here. And that's where I'm going to make my next cut at 54 degrees. Now, the wider the board, for example, with this 2x6 here, we're looking at a length of about 9.5 inches. So I'm going to mark it at 9.5 inches over here. And the end result is going to be a much larger star. And it kind of goes both ways. Like if you have a stock that's only 2.5 inches wide, you're going to get a star that's a lot smaller. I hope that makes sense. And once you figure that out, then you cut 5 of them. That's pretty obvious. We need 5 points to a star. And then you're going to set your saw to 36 degrees. And this is where things get very interesting, because I've got this funky little jig over here and this awesome little clamp. So let's actually start with this clamp here. A lot of people ask me, what is this thing? And this thing is called a toggle clamp. This is a separate clamp that you can buy from Amazon, or Lee Valley is another place that I know of. Actually, a few different tool stores have them. I mentioned Lee Valley because this one actually is from Lee Valley, and it's actually one of the larger toggle clamps. And this one's about $20 for one, which I found was a little bit expensive. And the clamp is actually a little bit too bulky for some of my other jigs. But you can get very similar toggle clamps on Amazon. They look exactly the same. They're just a little bit smaller. And I was able to get a package of 6 for $18.99. And that's Canadian currency. I know a lot of my viewers are Americans, so I thought I'd mention that. But yeah, the Amazon ones are amazing. I have a video coming up where I make a 3D star, and I'm using a lot of those Amazon clamps, and they're great. So yeah, Anyways, I'm not sure if I'll put a link in the description or not because I'm not in on the whole affiliate marketing scene. So anyways, I'll think about that. But if you just go to Amazon and you search for toggle clamps, you should be able to find something that looks like this. All right, and this other part of the jig here, this was actually another thing I had a lot of questions about. Basically, people just wanted to know what this angle was, and this angle for this jig is 54 degrees. And so basically I've got this piece of wood here that I'm using as a zero clearance fence for my blade. And then I've got this extra piece here with the clamp attached that I can put against that fence. I can clamp them all together and I can kind of adjust where this thing goes depending on the size of the stock that I'm using and therefore the size of the star. So I'll let you guys take a closer look at this here for just a few seconds. Hopefully this makes sense. I basically just screwed this to this and I cut a little notch here. I found that that helped with sawdust collection. If I didn't have that notch there, I'd get a bunch of dust kind of collecting in this area here. And then I wouldn't be able to slide this piece in here properly. And then my angles would kind of get all screwed up. So once you've got everything set up and your saw is set at 36 degrees, you're going to make your next two cuts. And I'm basically lining up the corner of that diamond shaped piece just over the edge of that zero clearance fence. And that's basically how I know where to line things up. So then I make my first cut at 36 degrees, and then I simply flip it over and make another cut at 36 degrees. And that's how you cut the points to a star. So obviously I'm going to repeat times 5. And that's pretty much all there is to it. All right, and for those of you that want to make this star using only 45 degree angles and not having to make a steep angle jig, this is how you do it. So you start by making that first cut at 45 degrees. Then you're going to measure the length of that 45 degree angle and mark it on this side here. In this case, it was about 4 5/8. And keep in mind that these are going to be shorter than the 54 degree angle ones, because the steeper 54 degree angle cut is just going to be longer. So once you get that mark there, then you can continue to cut 5 pieces and you'll still end up with a diamond shape, just with slightly different angles. Now, once you have the 5 pieces cut, you're going to be setting up the jig the same way that you set it up with the other star. However, you're going to be changing your angle to 31.6. And there's actually a preset on your saw for 31.6. I'm not sure why. I think it's for roofing applications or something. Now, I used to tell people to set it up to 31.5 because mathematically or geometrically, whatever you want to call it, 31.5 should be correct. But I find that with all the microscopic movements that I have in my jig system and my saw, I've kind of learned that 31.6 works better. And sometimes I have to go a little bit more than 31.6, which you'll see in just a few minutes. I should also mention that the angle of this jig is 45 degrees and not 54 degrees like the other one. So once I set my jig up the way that I did earlier, I go ahead and make that cut at 31.6. And then simply flip it over, clamp it down again, make another cut at 31.6. And I've got one piece of the star here. So I'm going to continue, make 5 of them, and I'll have 5 pieces to a star. Now this is where things get interesting, and I was debating whether to show you this or not, but I decided to go ahead and show you, because I wanted to be honest with you. This happens more often than I would like to admit, but usually when I go to fit my star together for the first time, I go to get that last piece in there, and it doesn't quite line up properly. And I've got some gaps. Now I wanted to show you this so that I could show you how to fix this, because this is pretty common. So basically these pieces aren't quite steep enough, but by a very, very small amount. So I'm just going to go back to my saw. I'm going to move my saw to the right a little bit. And by a little bit, I mean like a very tiny amount. You should be able to see the needle move here. I'm just tapping it a little bit, and yeah, it's really not much. This was actually too much, and I had to back it off in the end. I didn't record that part, but anyways. And then you also have to move your piece over before you cut it. Now, I used to move the whole jig system over, and it was kind of a pain having to unclamp everything. So now what I do is I actually use playing cards as shims, and I just slide 3 of them in here, and that moves the piece that I'm cutting over to the right, just enough to be able to shave a new angle into that. And let's take a look at what it looks like now. There you go. Now that is much, much better. I did have to cut all 5 pieces, but sometimes if the gap is small enough, you can get away with just recutting one of them. So if at first you don't succeed, keep trying, because it is just a matter of making a very, very small micro adjustment to your saw to completely get rid of all the gaps. So I hope that wasn't information overload. I hope it answered a lot of the questions that people had. And just a heads up, I am working on a 3D star, or a beveled star. I've been working on that one for a while. It was pretty hard to figure out those angles, and I've got all the filming done. I'm just working on the editing and commentary. I'm having a hard time trying to put that video together because there's so much footage, and I'm trying to explain things thoroughly, yet concise, but I also want to feature all my mistakes so that you guys don't make the same mistakes that I did. But it's been kind of difficult, so bear with me. That video is on the way. I'm just not sure when, but I am working on it. All right, thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.